Who controls what games you can buy? The answer sadly is not Steam, it's not developers, and it's not even governments, because this week actually proved that it's Mastercard. They can fine platforms $200,000 for selling games with, quote, no artistic value. Because apparently Mastercard are the judges of artistic value. But here's what Mastercard did not expect. They did not expect thousands of gamers flooding their call centers, and that actually working. And with that happening, the payment processors are beginning to crack. We've even got Valve making big statements. The payment processors even finally admitted a little bit of a truth that lies beneath all of this. It's a humongous story, and so it's actually understandable. We've got to begin with collective shout. But hang on a sec, I've got something really cool. So, do you know what's nice? Never not having the cable that I need, while also having a bag that isn't full of cables. And today, UGREEN, who are our sponsor, are at it again, and they're letting me achieve that. So get a load of these, right? This is their latest models, which now have got built-in retractable cables. These are absolutely amazing. But it is still handy to have a cable in case you need one, say for charging multiple devices, and that's where this comes in. This is, very simple, a little retractable cable. And man, it's absolutely brilliant. It's got a tiny footprint, and it never gets tangled, it never gets snagged, and it stores away neatly. It's so nice. And then, of course, we got the 20,000 milliamp hour battery. This thing is awesome. It'll charge up at 100 watts. It can output 100 watts as well through its retractable cable, plus 65 watts from the USB-C at the same time for 165 watts of once, which is enough capacity to recharge your MacBook Air 13 1.3 times, or say an iPhone 16 3.6 times, which is a lot. It's very handy when you're traveling, and it'll charge from every port at once. And then finishing off my kit, this is just lovely. 65 watt charger, retractable cable built in, and I just really didn't appreciate how nice it is not having a rat's nest of cables everywhere. And of course, being UGREEN, these have overvolt, overcharge, overtemperature, and short circuit protection, and basically, I'm always staggered by their price to performance. It's actually at the stage now where my parents, my partner, and my colleagues are defaulting to UGREEN for very good reason, and you'll find the best prices for these with the links below. Let's start with the people who kicked this off. Activism group Collective Shout decided to set the record straight. Obviously, they really did kick quite the hornet's nest. So, they say that they're fighting false claims and misinformation, and here's their story, at least as they present it. They say they only reached out to payment processors after Steam ignored them since April, and their post stresses something that they say is very important. The Collective Shout never asked itch to remove all adult content, just content that involved sexualized violence and torture of women. Now, that is content that's actually illegal in some territories. Now, what they said here is partially true, but there's a little bit of a problem. Their original call to action explicitly framed these platforms as facilitating child abuse game sales. That's the thing. They didn't just say specific games, they said platform. They targeted the platforms. And that's the sort of content that would be globally illegal, and therefore very good reason for payment processors to act swiftly. So, what's really happening here? How do we actually break this down? Essentially, right, Collective Shout wants to take credit for their win, but they also want to deflect blame for how it actually played out in the real world. They basically say that they wanted specific games to be removed, but they never back that up by actually mentioning what those games are. And then they imply that they couldn't predict how Steam and itch would react to what they did, that masses of games would end up being purged. But here's the thing, Collective Shout. Don't patronize us. You've used payment processors before. We know you know how this works. But at least for now, they're simply deflecting blame. They're arguing that itch didn't have to purge everything. But here's the problem. Realistically, they're wrong. Itch pretty much had no choice. It's a sensitive topic, but itch has talked just about as much as they're able to. With single-digit staff, they're essentially juggling angry developers, rightly angry developers, and a bunch of technical problems on the platform. Certainly doesn't look fun. And we've got this July 28th FAQ that explained their lack of options. Essentially, right, because itch is an open platform, they couldn't just remove specific games like Steam does. That's because they simply don't know about every game, because it's an open platform. They have a single-digit staff count. So in an ideal world, creators would just be honest about everything, and that would solve the issue. But we all know that that does not work at scale. So they essentially felt that mass de-indexing basically had to happen. At least that's their point of view. But itch does say that those games, they've been de-indexed. They're not gone. So here's what they maintain. The de-indexed or delisted content should still be available to users. That's of course as long as creators haven't went and removed the pages themselves. Now there's been confusion here, and that's down to some games. Consume Me, Last Call, and Mouthwashing were flagged by players and press. But what's odd is those games were already de-indexed before any of this stuff started. Itch's position is basically that if you lost access to a game completely, then something is wrong and you should contact them, because it ain't supposed to be like that. But then there's the payment processor problem, and that follows a similar logic. People basically pointed out their policy of withholding payments from banned accounts. Itch responded to that, saying, "We have no interest in withholding anyone's earnings." Basically, that policy existed before this crisis, and it exists to stop grifters from breaking their rules and profiting. It's just that in light of everything that's happened over the last fortnight, it's, not exactly ideal. But at least for now, they're trying to look forward, so here's basically what they've updated us with. They've tried talking to payment processors, and they've gotten a list of problematic topics, and all of those topics are now banned on their store. That is, of course, even though not all those topics are illegal, and you'll need to remember that distinction because we'll come back to it later in the video. Because, fortunately for your content listening and watching experience, that's just the start. So here's the latest development. They've actually found out how to get around this whole problem. Basically, Itch can now re-index free adult content. The reason why is real simple. If the game's free, then payment processors aren't involved, so they can't complain. And that means that going forward, there's going to be a new system. Content warning tags for anything marked not safe for work. And this will basically help the Itch team start to rebuild paid access to tagged games. Because those games are going to be back, and Itch is already reaching out to new payment processors, ones that perhaps may be comfortable with these products. They're also, of course, getting some hard definitions from existing partners because, hey, no one likes a soft definition. And that brings us to Stripe. They were nice and hard. They're a titan of the digital payment industry, so their position in this actually does matter, and they told Itch they can't process anything for gratification, but more importantly, two things. One, they explain why, and two, responding to all this, Valve talked. And because of that, we're beginning to understand what the hell is going on. Valve usually say very little until they're absolutely forced, but obviously, it's been a spicy few weeks, and they've taken quite a lot of actions. And that means we've got a perfect case study. Meet Vile Exhumed. Lovely name for a lovely game. It's from a solo dev and boutique horror publisher called Dread XP. And this game was close enough to release to actually have reviews in the press, but it's now not going to launch in Steam. The store page? Gone. The 3,000 plus wish lists? Deleted. And that blows because that is a real asset for a game developer. And honestly, if you're not in Steam, you're really going to struggle in sales. Now, all this happened after bouncing around the approval process for a month, and the denial reason was this, quote, sexual content with depictions of real people. But here's what's important, right? And it's weird. Vile Exhumed is a horror game that's not meant to be exploitative. It's basically one of those fake desktop indie games. The whole thing is you unpack a mystery through FMVs and text logs. It explores misogyny and parasocial relationships via implied adult content. Now, the point is the player should feel uncomfortable. That's entirely the point. And it should have sailed through approval when you look at its content, especially with an established publishing partner. But this week it didn't. And without a statement from Valve, we really couldn't know what's happening internally. So the good news is we do have a statement from Valve. To hit Valve's response, I first got to tell you what they've responded to. So Mastercard put out a public statement on, quote, recent headlines on gaming content. Hello. Anyway, they explicitly deny asking any platform to restrict sales, and they say that they haven't actually evaluated an individual game. Their claim is they allow all legal products to be sold. They only ban illegal purchases. Visa actually told customers the same thing, which would certainly make the last few weeks really confusing, wouldn't it? Because lots of perfectly legal content has been delisted from these stores. And, that is why Valve kind of just went and shot Mastercard and Visa down almost immediately. So, Valve released a rare statement to Kotaku, and here's what they revealed. Mastercard refused to talk to them directly. So that blows. Instead, what happened is Mastercard talked to their network of payment processors and banks, and then those middlemen then went and talked to Valve. And they basically refused to accept Valve's own content policy. They said that Valve must follow Mastercard's rule 5.12.7, which is thrilling. What's that rule? Well, that rule does ban illegal content, sure, but it also says any content that, quote, reflects negatively on Mastercard can be banned. Or, this is the real banger, content that, quote, lacks serious artistic value. I'm really glad that they are the people who now, yes, judge what serious and unserious artistic value is. Cool. Awesome that payment processors are now the judges of art. Fantastic. And if you breach that rule, Mastercard can revoke your ability to process transactions and impose a 200 grand fine. And that's where this all falls apart. It's also why Rule 15 exists on Steam. That was the rule, if you remember, basically said any content that may break payment processor rules, that Valve basically can kick that off Steam. Because, well, turns out this, what we just talked about, explains why Valve said may break. Really blows. Now, the content that's been removed, well, unless you're in specific territories looking at specific games, it's legal. And this is where Stripe then come in. Stripe confirmed this in their response to itch. They said they can't process anything related to gratification. And the reason why? Well, according to Stripe, it's restrictions placed on them by their banking partners. Not by the law, by banking partners, because ultimately it's about risk management. It's PR risk of being targeted by groups like Collective Shout, so hello again to you guys. But there's also a higher risk of chargebacks on adult products, and this would be one of the unit economic problems that we'd be dealing with here. And as GameIndustry.biz highlighted, basically they're losing money on refunds from embarrassed customers. But I think what's kind of key is that over these last few weeks, the real challenge to this whole system has actually been you. Turns out rebellions can kind of work, so the internet exploded with stories, YouTube did, it was quite a time. People were reaching out to Visa and Mastercard, just inundating their call centers. Yeah, so you're working in a call center, maybe you're a robot, who knows, but just legions of gamers over the horizon, flooding your phone lines. Now, this then meant that scripts circulated because, as you know, call centers all rely on scripts. And because people got scripts, well, we're gamers! We made guides, so you would basically end up with people having guides on how to reach various departments. And this would cover things like the right keywords to say, and the overall approach was never be aggressive, feign ignorance to waste their time, and some people even found a few allies working in these call centers. And what really pushed this is that many of the plans and many of the guides for dealing with these companies, well, those came from artists and creatives. And the reason why is those people have already been forced from sites like Gumroad. So basically, they've seen this whole playbook before. But this time, what's a bit different is we're actually seeing a real impact. As an example, Aftermath tracked the pattern over time, and as more and more call center resources got eaten up, the responses from these companies changed. And per their source, they went from, quote, respectful to defensive with each passing day. Others reported something that's also interesting, that across multiple calls, they got different scapegoats as for who is actually to blame here. So the pressure just kept on building. These companies then felt forced to address mainstream headlines because it turned out that their whole policies designed around avoiding bad PR led to them getting bad PR. Because whenever someone like me can sit down on the internet and say, hey everyone, Mastercard now get to decide what is or is not artistically valid, that's obviously pretty bad for them. Now, what all of this pressure did is kind of reveal the truth here. That this is not happening because of laws. It's happening because of these companies' policies. Now, these are private companies, and they are deciding how stores work. They're deciding how art gets distributed and what even is constituted as art. Now, Itch found a shortcut here to distribute free content, and that would essentially work for now. It's a stopgap measure. Maybe some people could accept donations. Or maybe you could find some of the more, just full liberal, do whatever you want, payment processors, right? To maybe do DLC. It's been a long-running thing in the Aero game sector. You get the game for free, and then there's some sketchy site you can get a bunch of DLC from it that's the real spicy stuff. But that's not an overall market solution, and obviously there's been a chilling effect here. There's a humongous, just false positive rate that has hurt so many developers. And it just erodes confidence in the market, and that is bad for the industry as a whole. This is obviously not a viable situation. Players and platforms are looking for solutions, and the good news is, next time, we'll take a look at what the industry has proposed to fix this entire goddamn mess. So stay tuned to that. And if you want a nice family story that doesn't involve gratification, maybe unlike some of these games, check out this one on Ubisoft, because they are keeping it in the family.